By the time Justinian entered my life, I had already lived several lives of my own. The actress, the courtesan, the wanderer, the believer. And somewhere between sea voyages, desert roads, humiliations, ambitions, lovers, and endless conversations about empire, I had become something far more valuable. I had become a woman capable of shaping herself deliberately. Most people spend their lives waiting to discover who they are. I began constructing myself instead, carefully, patiently. Almost the way architects raise great cathedrals, stone by stone, choice by choice. Because if a person can reinvent themselves once, perhaps they can do so again and again, until one day they become someone even they would not have recognized at the beginning of the journey. The world still remembered the actress. Some always would. Public opinion in Constantinople resembled marble more than silk, slow to reshape, resistant at first. Yet even marble yields eventually beneath persistent hands. So I persisted. I dressed differently, spoke differently. I attended religious ceremonies sincerely. I stopped trying to captivate every room I entered and began allowing people to discover me gradually instead. Some remained hostile no matter what I did. Others became curious. And curiosity is far more powerful than approval. Because once people begin questioning the story they have told themselves about you, they start noticing things they ignored before. Discipline, faith, intelligence, restraint, understanding. Looking back, I suspect part of me already sensed that another transformation was approaching. I simply did not yet understand its shape. I had already met Justinian, but meetings are simple things. Understanding someone is far more complicated. The more time we spent together, the more fascinating he became. He was not handsome in the polished, aristocratic way certain noblemen were handsome. There was something sharper about him, more consuming. Even during ordinary conversation, one sensed his mind moving somewhere ahead of the present moment, already constructing futures invisible to everyone else. Most people found him overwhelming. I found him interesting. And he already knew exactly who I was, not merely because of my beauty. Constantinople contained no shortage of beautiful women. No, Justinian had become curious about me long before we met. Stories about me travelled through every layer of the city. The actress who debated bishops, the courtesan who understood politics, the traveller who returned from Alexandria transformed by faith, the woman whose conversations powerful men remembered afterward. At first, I believe he expected fascination. Instead, he found recognition. Hours disappeared when we spoke. Most men wish to escape thought through pleasure. Justinian seemed to experience pleasure through thought itself. Conversation intoxicated him. Law, theology, architecture, military reform, philosophy, empire. He spoke of these subjects not as abstractions, but as living things he intended to shape personally. And I listened seriously. That mattered more than beauty ever could. Powerful men receive endless admiration. What they rarely receive is understanding. I gave Justinian that feeling, and slowly, over months and then years, we began transforming one another. He expanded my ambitions. I strengthened his certainty. At court, Justinian had always been respected for his intellect. Yet many aristocrats still viewed him as awkward, overly intense, too consumed by ideas to move gracefully through society. I softened him gradually, taught him the rhythm of conversation, humor, timing, and warmth. Confidence grows strangely inside people when someone they admire already sees greatness in them. Soon even Emperor Justin noticed the difference. So did everyone else. Justinian established me in a grand villa overlooking the Marmara Sea, and gradually it became one of the most fascinating houses in Constantinople. All the powerful people of the empire attended our gatherings. Among them stood men and women who would later shape the empire itself. Belisarius, rising steadily through the military ranks with terrifying discipline beneath his calm demeanor. His wife Antonina, clever and worldly, became one of my closest allies. There was Tribonian, whose brilliant legal mind fascinated Justinian endlessly. Powerful church figures, influential patrons of the blues, scholars and writers, men and women whose names would one day echo throughout the history. And yes, there were enemies, many of them. The aristocracy whispered constantly about me. Noblewomen looked upon me with carefully disguised disdain. Priests denounced the corruption of actresses while quietly accepting invitations to our dinners. Constantinople remained wonderfully consistent in its hypocrisies. But something unexpected also began happening among ordinary people. Women visited churches wearing simpler versions of hairstyles I popularized. Actresses and dancers began speaking openly about new possibilities for themselves. Servants whispered that perhaps birth alone did not determine destiny. The poor watched my rise with fascination because they recognized something in me that the aristocracy never would. I remembered what uncertainty felt like. The city divided itself around my name. Some saw me as immoral, manipulative, dangerously ambitious. Others saw something else entirely. A woman crossing boundaries society insisted could never be crossed. And perhaps both versions contained some truth. Still, the greatest obstacle remained untouched: the law itself. Roman law forbade men of Justinian's rank from marrying actresses. And for 4 years we fought that reality. 4 years, long enough for hope to become exhausting, long enough for gossip to sharpen into hostility, long enough for political enemies to wait confidently for Justinian to abandon me eventually. At times, even I wondered whether the dream had grown too large. Late at night, after the guests departed and the villa became quiet, I would remove jeweled pins from my hair and think about the strange distance between the lives I had lived. The starving girl in the hippodrome, the actress provoking crowds into outrage, the traveler sleeping beside caravan fires, the woman now discussing imperial law beside the future ruler of the empire. Sometimes the transformation itself felt difficult to comprehend, not because I doubted my worth, but because life can change so suddenly that part of the soul never entirely stops waiting for loss to return. Perhaps people who rise from uncertainty never fully forget how quickly the ground can shift beneath them. Through all those years, Justinian never once made me feel temporary. Even while the court resisted us, even while priests condemned the idea of our marriage, he continued building a future that included me openly and without hesitation. I think that was when I truly understood how deeply he loved me. Most rulers learn to separate love from ambition. Justinian somehow fused them together. The fiercest opposition came from Euphemia, wife of Emperor Justin. She represented the old aristocratic order completely and viewed me as an offense against the structure of society itself. During one gathering, she studied me coldly before saying, "Certain women confuse admiration with elevation." The room fell silent instantly. I understood the warning clearly, and perhaps she expected anger from me, or humiliation, or defensiveness. Instead, I answered softly, "Sometimes elevation arrives because others have spent too long confusing birth with worth." Justinian smiled slightly at that. Looking back now, I think Euphemia feared less the woman I was than the possibility of what I might become. And after her passing, the future Justinian and I had spent years reaching toward suddenly no longer felt quite so impossible. The Emperor Justin changed the law. For the first time in Roman history, actresses were permitted to marry into nobility. The decree spread through Constantinople like fire. The aristocracy reacted with outrage. Senators spoke darkly of moral decline, while certain noble families behaved as though the empire itself had been personally offended. But beyond the palaces, many ordinary people saw something else in it. For the first time, the distance between birth and power no longer seemed entirely movable. I remember holding the decree in my hands near the villa windows overlooking the sea, while morning light moved across the parchment. I had spent much of my life being told, directly or indirectly, where women like me were expected to remain. Suddenly, the future I had hardly dared to imagine no longer felt beyond reach. For 4 years, Justinian and I had moved toward marriage through resistance, rumor, political pressure, and uncertainty. 4 years of risk, 4 years of patience. I understood very clearly that youth, beauty, fascination, all these things are temporary, and I was determined to make the most of the opportunity before me. The choice seemed simple: marriage to Justinian, or a life spent as an obscure mistress on the edges of society. I was already 29 years old when the law was finally changed. A few months later, in the year 524, Justinian and I were married. The wedding felt almost unreal. The cathedral blazed with candlelight and gold mosaics, while choirs sang beneath the dome. Justinian took my hands into his as the bishop blessed our union before God and the empire. Our hands were bound together lightly with ceremonial cloth, while the bishop declared that our lives would now move as one. And suddenly I thought of my mother standing in the hippodrome years earlier, begging the factions for mercy after my father's death. The memory struck me so strongly I almost wept. Because until that instant, ambition had still felt partly like imagination. Now it possessed witnesses, ritual, history, reality. Soon afterward, Emperor Justin died, and the empire prepared for coronation. Nothing in human life resembles imperial ceremony in Byzantium. The city itself transformed. Processions filled the streets, bells rang constantly. Crowds gathered beneath balconies and colonnades, while incense rolled through Hagia Sophia in silver clouds. I wore imperial purple heavy with gold embroidery and gemstones. Servants arranged the long ceremonial robes behind me, while choirs sang beneath the immense dome overhead. And then came the moment itself. The patriarch approached carrying the imperial crown, while the cathedral seemed to hold its breath. I knelt. At that moment, I stopped thinking about myself entirely. When the crown touched my head, I felt triumph, but also responsibility. Power is not a reward. It is a burden willingly accepted. And from that day forward, the fate of millions would be tied to my decisions.
Written and created by Anastasia Bitkova.
Thank you for being here. If you're enjoying this journey, please like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments below.